Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to our fellowship application panel discussion. My name is Lauren Wright, and I am the brand manager at Equal Justice Works. Unlike our webinars, which walk through the specifics of the application, the purpose of today's discussion is to get a wide range of perspectives about the process. We've got a great lineup today. Krissy Colvin, Fellowships Program Manager at Equal Justice Works, is here to share general tips about the application. Vallen Solomon, a 2020 fellow at the King County Bar Association's Housing Justice Project, will give his perspective as a recent applicant. Alexi Freeman, the Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Denver Sturm College of Law, will speak from her experience assisting students through the application process. And last but certainly not least is Diego Cartagena, a 2003 fellow who now serves as President and CEO of Tzedek Legal Services. Let's get into it. So as we record this, we are roughly a third of the way through the application process, which means the fellowship candidates should now be locking down a host organization if they haven't already. Vallen, you serve as a fellow at the King County Bar Association's Housing Justice Project. How did you go about choosing them as your host organization? Tell us about the process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thanks for inviting me. But I think I connected with my host organization my first year in law school, kind of the first summer as my first job. And kind of from there, I continued to volunteer. I kind of continued to be in contact with the organization pretty much throughout law school. And then kind of my I guess it was going into my third year of law school, I kind of learned about a little bit more about Equal Justice Works fellowships, kind of see how they worked and kind of things like that. And then I kind of had an idea for a project. So I reached out to the Housing Justice Project and see if they would be interested in hosting and see if it was even possible. And that's kind of how I got connected with them. And yeah, I think, and also it's kind of important to note, I did get found out about the Housing Justice Project kind of randomly through some people at my school's career office, and they kind of just planted that seed in my mind, and it kind of rest is history.
That's awesome. So you reached out to the organization then?
Yeah.
How did you go about doing that?
Yes. Kind of informally, I actually texted my now supervisor. I was kind of like, hey, I heard about Equal Justice Works fellowships. Is this something you're familiar with? Is this something you'd be interested in hosting? Have you ever done this before? And he said, absolutely, we'd be interested to host. I told him a little bit about my project, what I kind of was thinking, and obviously it kind of evolved as I got more involved. But that's kind of how that worked. He was very on board from the beginning. So that was, I think, extremely helpful and really helped my project as a whole.
That's great. That's sort of the ideal situation, I would say.
I think so as well. I think I might have got a little lucky.
Yeah. So Diego, from a hiring perspective, how does your organization find candidates? Like if someone were to approach you with a project idea, what would you expect them to come prepared with?
Yeah, so I think it was, as was just mentioned, we really expect our candidates to have at least the kernel of an idea, and we certainly understand that they won't have every single detail completely determined and thought through, right? But number one, we want to make sure that it's an idea that fits within our existing practice areas, right? So the typical example that I give is that Tzedek does not engage in family law. We just don't have a family law practice. And so if someone came to us saying, well, I want to do family law for pregnant and parenting teenagers, that's great. We're probably not the right agency to host you, and we would give recommendations for other agencies. And then we just hear out, so what's that kernel of an idea that you have? How would you integrate it into our existing agency work? And if it all seems to be, at least initially, a good fit for us, we ask the student to go back and kind of work out the details, right? Put together essentially a more rounded proposal. We like to say nothing more than like a page and a half, but come to us, back to us, and we give a very specific deadline because we take all of those proposals and we talk about them at the management level to say, oh, who do we want to support? Which one is the best fit, et cetera. And then we loop back out with each candidate to let them know what the results were.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it sounds like you get a lot of applications then.
Yeah, I mean, we do our best. We post with all of the local schools. We post with schools across the country. We try to promote it on our social media platforms. But honestly, most often the students that kind of make it through are students who have been summer interns with us.
Good to know. That's definitely something that we suggest. It makes total sense. We're going to get into it more, but I'm excited to hear a little later, like of an example that you guys actually partnered with. So Alexi, can you share some examples of the ways that you've helped law students during the application process? Like what types of resources are available to students looking to get started?
Yeah, so you know, first, I don't think there's one perfect or cookie cutter like way, like you got to do this, you got to do this by then. I just don't think that's true. I mean, I always joke, my husband was a post-grad public service fellow, and he I think he got the offer to be sponsored like 2 weeks before it was due, and he got it, right? I mean, he's that person, right? I'm not advocating for the last minute 24-hour application. It's too much work. But point is like there's a lot of pathways, right? So I think that's important. But first, I actually just like to talk to students a little bit about why they think they want to do a fellowship in order to ensure it's a good fit. I mean, as I'm sure Vallen actually and Diego can both speak to, it's a lot of work. It's really meaningful work, right? But it takes some time, right? For you, for the host, for your team that hopefully is prepping you, you know, so you want to make sure it's right. And I think you want to make sure you're excited about a particular cause, community, something, right? To motivate you to do the work. And then I think I also like to sort of have an open conversation with students about what it is they actually want to do. Like, do they want to be in court all the time? Do they want to work on systemic change versus, you know, day-to-day direct service with clients? I mean, do they want to write, you know, more than they want to talk? I mean, these sound very simplistic, but I think sometimes coming up with like what that project is kind of hard, right? And you need to kind of think about, what have I enjoyed, right? What classes have I enjoyed? What internships have really spoke to me? You know, what lawyers did I hear speaking on a panel at my school that I was like, yes, that's what I want to do. I mean, you can pull from a lot of different, I think, buckets, right? If it's not as clear, like with Vallen, where it was like, okay, great, this is the org, this is the issue. For some students, it's not. So you have to kind of think about all the ways in which you've been exposed to law, you've been exposed to public interest, right? And then and kind of narrow down the funnel. So I think, you know, that having those kind of conversations is really, really important. I always point students also, this may sound kind of simplistic too, but to look at job descriptions of organizations. What is it like? What excites you? Like, I could read a job description and be like, nope, that's not me, right? Like, that is not what I want to do, right? But it can give you an idea, and then you can look at another one and be really excited about it. So, you know, psjd.org is a goldmine, right? And I have people, not only are there fellowship opportunities obviously advertised on there, which of course is important, but it also just gives you a sense of like what is out there, what jobs exist, what organizations exist. And for students who are willing to leave the state, I think that's the source. Like, that's where you got to go, right? You got to look about what groups are out there. I also sometimes think students think of our career office, or they think of their favorite professor, but they don't necessarily think about your alumni affairs office. The alumni affairs, like, they know where alumni are working, right? Those people can be hosts, those people can give you ideas, they can be connectors. So kind of like some of those things that students may not know off the top of their head, but can be really good idea generators too. And then, you know, I think the last thing I would say is, you know, assuming you can whittle it down and figure out some idea of an organization or a project, I try to just ask a whole lot of questions once they have things on paper, because I think where sometimes fellows might struggle a little bit is specificity, right? So they know they want to do X issue, but like, what does that look like day to day, right? What and the questions on EJW's fellowship are fairly specific, right? So I think that's how I try to pull, right? Well, how's that going to look? Who are you going to partner with? Who else is doing this work? Why is this the population that you need to serve, right? I don't know. Well, you need data on that, right? I mean, those are the kind of things to let them know what they need to put on paper.
Wow. Yeah. I feel like your students are very lucky to have you, because you seem like just such a wealth of information, and so many things that you're saying are like what we have in our applicant guide. You know, go to PSJD,
Yeah.
go talk to your law school offices. We also encourage fellow or prospective fellows to reach out to our alumni or our current fellows, or just take a look at what's available. We have a lot on our website with our fellow profiles. You know, there's a lot to see there, just to get a taste of the projects that have been funded in the past, sort of what the scope, because of course it is a 2-year fellowship. It's really important to look into like the specifics of that. So I really appreciate that advice. Krissy, do you have anything else to add? I mean, she did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I would say that honestly, this is kind of a dream panel, because you touched on all of the things that we were hoping you would touch on. I think the underpinning of all of that and what we talk about throughout the application process with candidates and prospective applicants is really fit, right? And so each of you have talked about fit in your own way. And so what made the most sense. So what we get most excited about is when candidates are able to talk about this being their dream job in the interview cycle. And so I took my dream and I matched with this host organization that their expertise was able to help me get to these specific goals and outcomes that we're looking for. And I've connected with my law school to get me connected to this right host organization. So it's all about why you're the right candidate to work on this exact project at this host organization and why it's the right time. And if you can put all of those things into the application, it's pretty hard to ignore.
Yeah, that's great advice. So just another question for you, Krissy. So a little later in the cycle, once candidates and their prospective host organizations have agreed to collaborate on an application, then of course they have to work together on the details, as we were talking about. The application, as Alexi mentioned, is pretty specific. Krissy, could you just give a brief overview of like the elements of a well-rounded project proposal?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first part is really about the candidates demonstrating that they have a good understanding of the population that they'll serve. And so there's space and application in that statement of need to really thoughtfully and carefully illustrate the need of that target community. And successful candidates in the application will take that opportunity to weave in quantitative data, absolutely, but also weaving in client stories and narratives to really demonstrate that need in a way that's really compelling. And then once that need is established, the project proposal will then allow the space for the host organization and the fellow to come with us with ambitious but feasible goals and ideas for meeting that need or filling that gap, right? And so in that section, we want to hear about the strategies that you'll implement to make a measurable difference. And the most compelling and well-rounded applications will also demonstrate the lasting impact of the project itself beyond the fellowship term. And then finally, because fit is so important, the project proposal will need to fit within or expand upon the host organization's existing mission, vision, or strategic plan. The part of the project proposal will be written by the host organization, and that section of the project proposal will reflect the organization's full support of the project and allow space for the host organization to state its commitment and willingness to work as a partner in implementing the work.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for that brief summary, which of course, just a plug for our resources on our website. Of course, our fellowship applicant guide lays that process out for you. So thank you, Krissy. And what a great segue to you, Diego, as the host organization. So as Krissy just mentioned, the fellowship project should expand upon the scope of the host organization's work, their mission. Can you just give an example of a project that Tzedek has hosted and describe how it built upon the organization's mission? Like, what was the overall impact of the project?
Yeah, no, happy to do so. And just before I do that, I want to kind of build off of something that Krissy and Alexi mentioned. You know, in terms of when you're thinking through your project and your proposal, I like to tell even individuals who are talking to me for the first time about their thoughts and potential projects, you should be interviewing your host organization as much as they're interviewing you, right? You want to make sure it's going to be a good, supportive host organization. And I think that factors into this whole idea, right? Of like, how do you integrate the project? How does it complement the work that the organization is doing? And how do you make sure that it is work that will continue on even after the fellowship? So the example that I have is from a couple of years ago. Nicholas Levenhagen was an Equal Justice Works Fellow with our organization. He had a real drive and passion for addressing elder justice issues. And he noted that we have an elder justice practice, and we also have a practice where we serve Holocaust survivors. And at that moment in time, it was really focused on helping Holocaust survivors with applying for reparations payments from various foreign entities. And so he put two and two together, essentially. He said, you know, Holocaust survivors are older individuals who will inevitably need assistance with elder law issues. So I would like to craft a project that serves as a bridge between these two different practice areas. I want to bring what you're learning in the elder justice space over to Holocaust survivors. and create a feedback loop, right? What we're learning about serving Holocaust survivors over to the elder justice space. And so that was his pitch. And he was able to add an additional component, which is that we have something called the Holocaust Survivors Justice Network, where we were teaching pro bono attorneys how to represent survivors in reparations cases all across the country. And so the added component that he thought about was, well, can we take some of the elder justice work that we're doing and export it through the Holocaust Survivors Justice Network to pro bono attorneys in other parts of the country? And so we were able to do that with advanced planning work as well as with public benefits work, right? So it was this great, like, he saw all these disparate pieces out there and he crafted a program to bring them all together. And the work that he launched is still going on right now. We have an attorney. He decided to move on. He went on to do other work, but we have an attorney that took over essentially his project and has continued the work.
Oh, that's really amazing. I did get goosebumps. Wow. Yeah, perfect example. I really appreciate you coming prepared with that one because, like, yeah, it's all there. Really appreciate that. So, Vallen, as a 2020 fellow, it wasn't long ago that you were creating the roadmap for what is now your day-to-day work. What advice can you offer to candidates in the design stage of the project proposal? And, is there anything you wish you had done differently?
Yeah, sure. So as it relates to just general advice, I think the main thing that, kind of my project has taught me and kind of just the whole fellowship has kind of taught me is you have to be flexible, right? You can't have one rigid idea and stick to that and kind of hope that's going to work for 24 months because that's probably not going to happen. And I think, kind of my fellowship might be, or this time period, I guess, might be a little unique. I planned my fellowship in the summer of 2019. COVID hit winter 2020, and then I think I got my fellowship around that same time. So it was really changing. And then kind of, we weren't sure how long COVID was going to last, how long it was going to go on. So everything kind of kept changing. So I really had to keep really adapting my project kind of even well into my fellowship. And I'm still adapting it to this day. So I think being flexible is one thing I think that, it's going to force you to do. And I think that's one thing that's probably going to benefit your project at the end if you can be flexible, if you can adapt to kind of what's going on. And another big thing that I think all of the panelists have touched on, it's important to talk to as many people as possible, right? And whether this is staff at Equal Justice Works, whether this is people at your school, whether it's fellow Equal Justice Works, alum, I think that was one thing I was able to kind of help me, even just kind of walk me through the process and even just get me introduced to the process, really. I think that was extremely helpful. I think everybody has kind of said that kind of goes without saying. But another thing I would like to say is choose something you care about. I think it really can make the difference, and it can push you, can give you that battery in your back, right? It kind of can push you to just strive a little harder, to go a little farther, kind of put that extra work in it. So I think if you're able to kind of do those three things, I think hopefully you can have a successful project. But as it relates to going back, and if there's anything I can change, I will say I didn't talk to so many practitioners in my host organization to kind of later in the game. So I kind of had to switch a lot later, and I've had to adapt later, closer to the deadline. So I will definitely say get connected to your host organization, tell them the project, work with them on the project as early as possible. So you're not running up against deadlines, trying to adapt, trying to talk to all these different people. I think that's because at the end, I think that's really what makes your project really go over the top, is when you can involve other people and talk to other people about it. It can turn a good idea to a great idea, and kind of my experience. I think I think that answers all the questions.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, and very timely advice. At this point today, as we're recording, we're a third of the way through. People should be partnering with their host organization. Of course, people work to their own schedule on the application. We definitely make that recommendation for a reason, because as you said, you want to really be making sure you're on the same page as early as possible, looking together at the application because it is so in depth. That's a really great reminder. So thank you for that. And then, since you are a fellow who has been working remotely this whole time, I also appreciate your plug to just talk to as many people as possible. People might still be remote, or we don't know what's going to happen. So it's just important to really reach out and be proactive in making those connections with your host organization. Diego, is there something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. And I suspect this also applies in Alexi's context is keeping in mind that the folks that you're working with at the host agency or at the law school, if the law school is kind enough to lend you support, they've also got like a million and one different things, right? So while for you, it may be your summer internship, and ideally your host for your summer internship is giving you some flexibility. For example, I asked my host agency for my 2L summer, like, I'm putting this proposal together. I want you to be my host agency. Are you okay with me like cutting, like specifically putting in my schedule every single day, some time to work on it here and now with you, right? But in case you're not, and you're mostly interacting via Zoom or via, email exchanges, know that that attorney that you're working with, they have a full caseload, right? And hearings and this, that, and the other. So it can be really tough when it's like a couple days before and like, great, here's my first draft. Can I get feedback? And you're like, oh, wow. Okay, we're in a time crunch now. And we've unfortunately been in a few circumstances like that where the schedule kind of goes a little wonky on us. And, we've had to take drastic measures, like say, like, look, we're going to essentially completely rework this proposal with you in the next 24 hours. And hopefully you're okay with that. But that's the situation we find ourselves in. And so you really don't want to be in that position at all.
No, that's not ideal. That doesn't bode well, for your work with this organization. Obviously, you want to start on a good foot. So good flag. Yeah, everyone is really busy. And as we learned just scheduling this, panel, it takes time to get people on the same page. So yeah, great advice. Krissy, did you have something to add?
Well, yes. So to your point about getting out to the right foot, so that you're not only working with your host organization on the application, right? So this is really a relationship that'll last at least 2 years. And so you're thinking about all of those things and how you're going to manage this project and manage your time and help the attorneys manage their time as much as you're able to get on their schedule, and just sort of setting the right kind of foot forward while you step into your role as an employee at that host organization. You want to maintain and manage those relationships as professionally as you can, working backward from that deadline of September 20th this year.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of the fellows end up staying on at their host organizations, or at least using the connections they made at the host organization to find their next position. So absolutely, you really want to start on your best foot and go from there to, I hope, success. Thank you all for that. Really good advice. So the Equal Justice Works Design Your Own Fellowship is meant to bridge civil legal gaps in underserved communities by leveraging the passion, skill, and experience of public interest attorneys. The application asks for both a statement of need and a personal statement, and often in these narrative segments, applicants share their personal motivations for pursuing the proposed project work. We often see applications from individuals who seek to serve their own communities and encourage candidates to share their connections to both the communities they serve and the issues they would address, which may be sensitive topics or just otherwise challenging to talk about. Alexi, so you have a distinguished record of social justice advocacy, and you currently serve as the Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at your law school. Drawing from these perspectives, what advice would you give to applicants as they seek to address these challenging topics in their proposals?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question. And I think the question is always important and heavy, and I think it feels even more important and heavy in the world that we're in, right? Now, and the advocacy we're seeing. So, I think I'll go with the easier. I see this question in two buckets, like you as candidate and then project, right? Arguably both, and sometimes could be dealing, right, with issues of identity and all that. So I was related to the project, and I say this is easier because I think it's always easier to talk about these issues. Well, not always, but oftentimes easier when it's, not necessarily like your personal vulnerability coming out, right? But instead you're describing a project, right? So when it comes to the project, like, especially now, if you're applying, we're in the middle of a racial reckoning, right? There's like access to justice issues that have been, always existed, to be clear, but have been expanded as it relates to COVID or health, housing, right? All these things, there's oppressive heat across the country because of the climate change. There's so many issues, right, that are going on right now. that I believe personally are rooted in issues of oppression, marginalization, et cetera, structural issues. To me, when I see who EJW funds and the projects they fund, like EJW wants to fund this work, right? So I think students need to talk about it, right? But I think they need to do their research, and I think they need to do their homework in terms of being sure to explain why the issue, why the community, getting the data, getting the stories, collaborating partners, all that kind of stuff. You have to justify what you're doing and why. And I think that's important because there are so many issues and communities that really demand our attention. And unfortunately, there still is limited funding, right? So I think you really have to paint the picture of that community and that cause. When it comes to sort of you as a person, and as a woman of color, I feel like I can speak to this really, really personally. It's really hard for some people, understandably, to talk about issues of identity, to talk about issues you care deeply about, to talk about issues that are sort of, near and dear to your personal identity, to your personal value system. And frankly, I think that's harder sometimes for law students because at law school, most of the time, you are asked to do not do that. You are asked to black letter law it, right? You are asked to forget context, to forget history, to forget the emotional element, right? Focus on the information you need to gather, et cetera. I find that troubling within legal education, despite being a member of legal education. But I think that's hard for a law student to switch, right? Because you got to switch from the facts and the ruling and instead reset your brain to share the personal and the emotional. So I think you have to sort of recognize that you're pushing back against the norm that you have probably generally been hearing throughout law school, with the exception of maybe your clinic, right? Your internship, it is kind of the vibe, right? And it has been for generations. So to me, it's this is the time to bring your full self, right? This is the time to share who you are, how and why you've developed the value system that you have, why you're so well suited to do this work, both professionally experienced and also the personal perspective that you bring. And I think you should be proud of who you are, right? And be proud of what you do and the value you'll add. Lived experience is hugely valuable in this work. And I think if you're a member of a historically underrepresented group, there are so many times, frankly, when your identity, is held against you. And I believe, I should say, is held against you in our country, right? This is one of those times when you want to share that, in fact, your perspective and what you've navigated, it's a real asset here, right? So I don't think you want to shy away from it. But I sort of say that recognizing that some people have not felt like they can always bring their full self, right? But I think this is the time when hopefully you can feel empowered to do so. And hopefully your host organization recognizes that, right? And wants you to do that as well. I think if they don't, there could be a conflict. I think you want to step back and think about that, right? And with that said, I would say if you are also someone who has a little bit more distance from the community you're seeking to serve, because of course there are candidates like that too, you can still bring up identity issues, acknowledging those differences, right? I think I'd rather know that you recognize, right, where you are distinct from the community you serve than how you're going to seek to understand them, right? If this is not part of your personal journey. So both ways, I think this is the time in which to really share who you are and what's made you who you are, and then how you think it's a good fit. This host is a good fit, and this project is a good fit for your perspective and your lived experiences.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you for sharing from, all of the different perspectives and identities that you bring to the table. Really appreciate that, and would love to open this same question up to the rest of the group, especially you, Diego and Vallen, since you have gone through this process of sort of writing about your experiences and the identities that you bring to the table in the application process. Is there anything that you just want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I would echo what Alexi said, right? I think you really have to, at least for me, I tried to lean into it, right? Understand the issue, understand, my role in the issue. I think and kind of talk about that. And I think, it's hard because law school doesn't really teach you that at all. It kind of rips that out of you and a lot of times. So I think being able to acknowledge that, being able to connect with that, and I think it's really helpful, and I think it's something that would probably make a successful applicant. I think if they can kind of connect themselves to the issue, understand the issue, and hopefully be a part of the change.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. As a host organization that's evaluating different candidates and applications, we tend to still talk about it in terms of cultural competency, right? And does this person bring to the table the cultural competencies that we think are necessary to effectively advocate on behalf of the community? And so that's only going to come out in the personal statements and in the reflections on why you want to engage in this work, what informs your passion and advocacy for it. So.
That's great. Krissy, is there anything, I think we've got a pretty good, robust answer, but is there anything else that you want to share just from the, the internal perspective?
Yeah, I think, I couldn't say anything better than the folks in this room, and I really appreciate the perspective that was brought into, and the very thoughtful perspective that was brought into this conversation. I would say that the personal statement is an area in which candidates can feel really stuck, right? And so for maybe the reasons Alexi highlighted, that it's easier to talk about the work than your personal motivations and your personal vulnerabilities and what brought you to the work. And I think it's okay to take your time in piecing that personal statement together and really allowing yourself the space and time for that statement to feel authentic and true, and to read how you would like it to read, and really painting your story and your picture as part of the application. And we're excited to read them. We're excited to read your applications and to hear your story and to hear what brought you to the work, and to hear more about not only what's brought you to the fellowship in the next 2 years, but also public interest and this world and this sphere, and how you see yourself as a lasting kind of change agent. So thank you so much again for your thoughtful responses to that question.
Yeah, that's great. So speaking of, this world that we are in, it's just very uncertain in a lot of ways. Does anyone have any final words of advice that they would like to share for, law students looking to apply for an Equal Justice Works fellowship, or just generally going into public interest law?
I can say one thing to the former. Denver law is like a top 100. We're not a top 20 law school. And I think some law schools have more of a fellowship culture than others, where they are really encouraging students and really supporting them. And I think, along with team members at the law school, I think we're trying to shift that at DU. And we've been lucky the last couple of years, we've gotten a couple fellows, which is great. And that's because the students are awesome. But I also think, I share this because I think some students just don't think they can get a fellowship, right? If they don't have a particular thing on their resume or go to a particular school. And, I really appreciate EJW taking a holistic approach and having candidates that represent all different schools, all different issues, all different identities. So I would just say, if you don't go to Harvard, Yale, and Stanford, you can still get a fellowship, right? And I think that's just important. And I don't know if, I'd love to think that every school is promoting these equally and positively, but I just don't know if that's the case. And I think those of us in law school need to do a better job. So if you're at a school, right, where you're not hearing it everywhere, and there's not sessions everywhere, and you're not getting the emails and all those things, be proactive, and sort of frankly force your school to pay attention, and put yourself out there. Because I do think that you can get it, right? If you do your homework and you do all this good work, regardless of sort of where you go, and if you're not a 4.0 and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's a good flag. And just a plug here for, the resources that we have on the website. We have actually, regularly update our sponsor preferences lists, that has nationwide preferences from our sponsors who are already committed, as well as, some state specific issue areas that those sponsors are specifically looking to target. So it's a really crucial guidepost for people who are looking to apply, especially if they feel like, maybe they're coming from a state that has not gotten as many fellows in the past. It's a great place to start and just see how what they're thinking fits in with what the sponsors are thinking.
Yeah, and I could speak to that a little bit actually, because I did use that and I found it very helpful. It kind of was the thing that kind of helped me. It's okay, this is what they're looking for, and this is what my idea is. How can I kind of bridge the gap? How can I meet these two things together and combine my interest with something they're looking for? And I think just doing that research on EJW's website, seeing the stuff that they had out there was really kind of, I think, helpful to me. Kind of helped me formulate my own plan and kind of further define my projects. I think it was helpful in the long run.
I love to hear that. Thank you. Yeah. And I think that just generally is post fellowship, later in the career, when you're looking for your own opportunities, it's great. It's a great skill to be able to sort of adapt what you thought your plan would be to what, the people who have the money and could fund the work are looking for. There's a lot of opportunity to meet in the middle there. And it's a great, place to start with this application process. Cool.
Vallen, I'm so glad to hear that the website was a helpful resource for you. I was just going to add here that we're excited to hear from prospective applicants, and we look forward to those conversations that we're having all along the application cycle. And so I hope folks, the website is definitely a comprehensive look at our programming, what we funded previously. We have that application guide, sample applications, as sponsor preferences, but don't leave questions unasked. And please feel free to reach out to our staff if there's anything that's not clear or anything that we can do to support you as you kind of mold out that project. We're glad to do that and to be available, as are folks from your law school and folks probably from that host organization that you're taking a look at. So don't leave questions on the table. Don't leave questions unasked.
Yeah, and as you can see just from watching this panel, there are people all over the Equal Justice Works community who are really passionate about getting you into this work in public interest law, and we are all here to support you. There are people on Twitter who reach out to us saying they want to talk to applicants. Like, send them my way. I will give them advice. So yeah, please feel free to reach out. I mean, the first point of contact, just an easy one, fellowships@equaljusticeworks.org. Krissy and her team are there to answer any questions. So we are here for you, is probably the biggest takeaway for me. Well, thank you, everyone. This was such a helpful panel. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and speak to applicants. And yeah, thank you so much for your expertise, you guys.